Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So expropriate BP under the Defense Production Act of 1950. There's plenty of authority to seize them. You can direct them to stop the flow of oil, and then if they don't do that, then you say produce a solution. If they don't produce the solution, you seize them. This can be done within 24 hours at the very most. And then, of course, you've got a huge backlog of liability claims against BP that are going to be working their way through the courts. You've got to prevent BP from transferring their assets out of the United States. What you'd be seizing, of course, is BP of the United States, or depending on where the headquarters of BP North America is, you'd seize that. If it's in Canada, you can't seize it. But whatever's within the continental or United States in general, that you can seize, and it is time to seize them. Then you want to hold their assets in escrow, stop them from transferring assets out. You also want to prevent them from speculating in the derivatives market on the price of oil and related things. So you basically want to shut them down and put them under a trustee who would be appointed by the U.S. government, and then you would essentially dragoon and marshal all of their assets to put an end to the oil spill, to clean up the damage that has been done, and to essentially await then the results of these court cases. Again, if you don't seize them, they will undoubtedly begin transferring assets out of this country to put it beyond the reach of U.S. courts, and therefore they will be shafting all of the victims that they have created among the fishermen, the tourist industry, people with health claims, and so forth. So, expropriate BP would also be a very, very salutary moment. This is exactly the kind of thing that Obama does not want to do. I don't care if Obama's furious. I don't care if he has a temper tantrum. I'm not interested in the soap opera histrionics that some seem to be so concerned about. The main thing is we need brisk action. We would need a presidential executive order saying if BP doesn't stop this within 12 hours, 24 hours, I'm going to seize you, and then when they fail, I'm seizing you. You are seized, and nominating then the trustee. A little bit like what happened to Prescott Bush back in October of 1942 when his Union Banking Corporation was seized under the Trading with the Enemy Act. Trading with the Enemy Act might also be relevant in the current situation, but I think you basically want to stick with the Defense Production Act. Now let's also take a look at the situation with this aid flotilla off the coast of, in the eastern Mediterranean. The Israelis have, of course, stormed these ships and taken them over. The condemnation of this action worldwide is virtually unanimous. And, of course, we join here in condemning the actions of the Israelis. We want to call for the immediate lifting of the blockade on Gaza. We want to call for the end of the Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. We want to call for the creation of an independent Palestinian state. The platform on this broadcast has long been the Geneva Accords of November 2003, Yasser Abed Rabo and Yossi Beilin, the two-state solution and the related stuff that goes with it, plus a Marshall Plan for the economic development of the entire region. If you're perplexed by Israeli politics and the fanaticism that seems to grow there, remember that Netanyahu himself, as finance minister, had gone very far towards the destruction of the Israeli economy. And in this small country, the rates of child poverty and related indices of economic failure are very, very great. But now, the thing that is important now is the crisis between the Israelis and the Turks. The Israeli policy, of course, before this had been to reach out beyond the band of Arab states surrounding them, reach out to Turkey, reach out to Iran, certainly, up until most recent years, reach out to Ethiopia, reach out to other countries outside of the Arab belt. But now that attempt has pretty much come to an end. And what we see is a militant course by very interesting Turkish Foreign Minister Davutoglu, who essentially has registered the fact that the European Union is not likely to adopt the Turks. I think that's a terrible mistake. But the European Union says they don't want the Turks in the European Union. So says that will tell you, fine, we'll draw that conclusion. We will not seek further integration into the West. But here's the thing. If the Israelis attack a Turkish ship on the high seas with whatever pretext and kill Turkish civilians, it is the right of Turkey to invoke Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, which is the requirement of collective self-defense against an attack from outside of the NATO alliance. Remember also, the United States has no written alliance. There's no formal alliance structure of any kind with Israel, whereas with Turkey, there is. The U.S. is committed, treaty-bound, to do something to defend Turkey. Turkey as the platform, which it is, the Incirlik Air Force Base and the various naval bases. Without Turkey, the so-called U.S. power projection into the Middle East would be basically impossible. Suppose we now have the Rachel Corrie. That's an Irish ship. But we have other ships. I believe we have 3 Malaysian ships announced by Mahathir Mohamad that are heading towards Gaza. If this action is repeated, the Turks may well just based on what they find in terms of their commission, the Turks have mounted a commission to investigate what has happened this past week. If they do this, they may well invoke Article 5 of the NATO treaty. What will the United States do if the Turks demand collective self-defense? Is NATO a dead letter in terms of the real purpose of NATO, or is NATO merely a sham to allow out-of-area deployments, in other words, imperialism in the service of the U.S.? Suppose you get a point where Turkey says, fine, we've had it with NATO, we're leaving, we're quitting, we're out of NATO. That would be the first time since the formation of NATO in 48-49 that you get somebody leaving. And if the Turks left, who else would decide to leave? Interesting question. The other thing is the way in which the crisis was essentially an ultimatum to Israel saying, if you don't put all of the people that you've taken prisoner onto airplanes and send them to Turkey by midnight a couple of days, we will break diplomatic relations. And sure enough, the Israelis sent them all back. There had also been by the Israelis that they would put certain of these people on trial, especially Turks. Davutoglu also pointed out, saying, if you put Turks on trial, we will reciprocate by putting your entire commando force and their commanders, and it might have reached all the way up to Netanyahu, we will put all of them on trial. So it appears that the Israelis are not going to put anybody on trial. Now, that essentially undermines the entire Israeli thesis on what has happened. So far, no Israeli was killed. No weapons have been found and produced. They produced a couple of slingshots. No firearms of any kind have been found. The Israelis do not come forward with the full array of films they're likely to have. It's also it seems to be the case that the Israelis are withholding the Al Jazeera camera team films that were made during the incident. There were no Iranians on board. There were no Hamas members. There were no Hezbollah members. There were no Al-Qaeda members. Or if there were, they were simply let go. So there's a very big glaring contradiction. If there were Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah on board, then the Israelis have simply let them go. So that doesn't sound very convincing. No terrorist equipment has been found. Above all, no rockets have been found. None of the things that were supposedly the reason for this were ever found. So that is that seems to completely refute the Israeli story. And of course, then we have the fact that an American citizen was killed. So this simply documents the incompetence of Netanyahu, and that if the blockade is lifted and the occupation ended, that's probably the fall of Netanyahu, which would be a positive step for the Israelis. And then on to the two-state solution. And we'll be back in a minute.